Hello, today's video was prompted by an email I received from German developer Marcus Detail, who said that he was facing the challenge of locking selected rows in a continuous form so they could no longer be edited. He wanted the lock to be activated when a checkbox was set to true, and he tried using the before update event, which did work, but he felt it wasn't optimal because users believed they could make changes only for the system to change those back again afterwards. So he wanted a better method. And I came up with a system here for an example database, which I'm going to show you now. 4 different variations of the same form, and it's based on students in an imaginary school, so none of the data is actually real. And in the first and most simple version here, then we've got a series of records for nearly 1,500 students in alphabetical order, and we are able to change the name. If we've typed that in wrongly, we could, if we had made a mistake in entering the gender, we could change that. We can change the date of birth, as you can see here, and so on. We've also got the year group, the tutor group. We can change any of those for records unless they have been locked. In care, another checkbox. And if we change this so we deactivate a student, then we get the leaving date put in. I'll just reverse that again. For ones that have got the lock checkbox already ticked, you'll see that I can no longer make changes to any of the text box or combo box fields. They are all locked, same for the date and so on. I can still, in this initial form, make changes to checkboxes, and that's something that I may wish to adapt here. Also, if I do lock something like that, it doesn't tell me when I've actually locked that. But if we go to the code here, you can see that we've got 3 events that are used on form 1. The main one, lock unlock controls, it just says define controller's control access control, and for each of the controls on the form, if it's a text box or if it's a combo box, then the locked state of that control depends on what the checkbox is. So if the checkbox is ticked, then the control is locked. If the checkbox isn't ticked, it's unlocked. Doesn't apply to checkbox controls though. And I'll come back to that code in a second there. After the lock checkbox is ticked, then it calls that procedure there. And finally, so it applies to the current record, then on the form current event you call that procedure again, so it then determines whether or not the controls are actually locked or not when you move to a particular record. So one record can be locked and another one can be unlocked. There's other code as well, but that's the basic code here. One problem with this is that there may be certain fields like the primary key and the lock date, for example, that I actually want to have always locked. So I'm going to just uncomment those, and I'm also going to change it that if I do tick that checkbox, then the lock date is also then implemented. Let me show you what I mean by that. So if I just move this down a bit here and tick on that there, you can see it's now put in the time I've actually done that. Same with this one and so on. So that's the basic code in form 1. Form 2 just adds in locking of checkboxes when I tick this. So here, this one that's been locked already, you'll see that I can't actually unlock those checkboxes. I can change them for any of the controls that aren't locked, but I can't change them once it is locked. So if I lock that one, then okay, the lock date goes in here. Now that is also locked as well. But you'll notice that also means I cannot reverse that. If I've made a mistake, it means I'm stuck with that situation. Now the idea is you want to make sure your users do not make mistakes when they lock the checkbox. They only lock it if they need to. But while it might be an advantage that it is now fully locked down and they can't reverse it, that's something you may not be happy with. So if you want to make it reversible, we've now got a situation whereby any of these are locked for once the lock checkbox is done, but that one has been made an exception of there. I can lock and unlock that, but once it's locked, the others, everything else on that form is locked. So if we go to form 3 code here, the difference now, Form 2 I just included checkboxes. In Form 3 I've just said the same thing here, but it doesn't apply if the control name is the lock checkbox, but it applies to everything else there. So we've got all of the controls now except the lock checkbox are locked down once that checkbox is done. And fourth one, just a further minor variation, I've added an image here which is visible, of a padlock, which is visible only if a control, or rather a record, is actually locked. So now when I tick this, you will see that not only does the lock date appear, but the padlock appears. If I untick, both disappear here. Now the way that works is using a different technique, and that involves using a image control, which is always visible, but it is overlaid with a command button, and the command button has been made so that it is transparent only when the lock checkbox is ticked. Otherwise it's opaque, which means that you can't see the image underneath. And the code to do that in Form 4 is done based on the detail paint event. It's the only way that you can have certain controls appear for some records but not others. And basically command lock, the button I was talking about there that overlays the image, then is made transparent if the checkbox is ticked, otherwise it is opaque. Full details about that are on another web article. Okay, to find the article and example app, please go to isleofdogs.co.uk lock records continuous forms. And to remind you then, the basic code in the first form consisted of 3 different items. The main thing, the procedure lock unlock controls, then it just goes through each of the controls in turn, and if it was a text box or a combo box, then it will lock them if the checkbox has been ticked. Moves on to the next control. It applies that immediately after you actually tick a checkbox, and it also then makes sure that it applies to the current checkbox by running the form current event and then going through that code as well. So it applies to selected records which have had the checkbox ticked and not otherwise. But building from that, then over the next few forms, then I added in checkboxes to the code as well, so that they also got locked if the lock checkbox itself was ticked. But I, in some of the forms, then made an exception of the lock checkbox, so you could reverse that particular one. And I also added a couple of controls that are always locked, pupil ID and lock date, for example here. When the lock checkbox was ticked, then we added some code here to set the date and time that it was checked, and if you unticked it again, you removed that and re-queried the form. And in Form 4 I added the lock icon, the little padlock image there, and I used the detail paint event for that. And for more details about that particular approach, go to isleofdogs.co.uk paint me transparent, and the article there also includes an example application. Thanks ever so much for watching. If you found it useful, as always, please add a like and leave a comment. Suggest topics for future videos in this series. I hope this will inspire you to adapt it for your own purposes, and please subscribe, and then you'll be notified whenever new videos are uploaded. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.